A pixel is the smallest point at which a digital image can be manipulated. Squares of colour arranged to create a larger mosaic. As screen resolutions increase, the pixel becomes smaller and smaller, becoming the invisible cells of an image. Early video game consoles worked within a very small screen resolution. The Atari 2600 used 192 by 160 pixels, and the Nintendo Entertainment System 256 by 240, while your HD TV uses 1920 by 1080. This meant that graphics created on these old systems could only be so visually complex and have a restricted colour palette. There's also the classic story of Mario and Zelda creator Shigeru Miyamoto giving Mario a big nose and mustache to get around the lack of facial detail. Much of this visual style was constructed with readability and gameplay in mind rather than any visual aesthetic. It was often also created by programmers who may not have had any real art background. Nowadays, most people see these visuals as crude and dated, our best attempts to realise something visually within the confines of technical limitation. But there are a core group of artists, musicians and designers who have returned to the scene of our early digital years to take another look at and uncover the unconsidered artistic merit and exploring the powerful possibilities of the pixel. Jason Rohrer is at the forefront of the indie art game movement. His short 100 by 16 pixel game, Passage, is a surprisingly moving and engaging representation of life and death. He did all this with two characters no more than 8 pixels tall. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing him, in which he spread some light on the mysteries of the pixel aesthetic.
For my third game, Passage, I stumbled onto pixel art almost by accident just because of the event that I was making Passage for demanded that the games be low resolution. So I was making a low resolution game, and that basically means pixel art. And once I started using pixel art, I realized how powerful it was because, well, first of all, it does look like something that came off of a computer. It's not really trying to emulate a visual style from any other medium. Second of all, it has this sort of, it can be representational, but at the same time, it's abstract enough that there's all this room for interpretation. So it's blocky and it looks computerized and it looks like something that's at home on the computer, but it also has this kind of expressive power and this kind of ambiguity to it. The more specific you draw something, according to Scott McCloud, the less likely people are to sort of identify with it and attach to it. It becomes a very particular person. It doesn't become just anybody, or it doesn't leave room for you to step into it. I don't believe that pixel art existed in the way that we remember it existing. If you go back to like the 8-bit era and you play a Nintendo game or one of those games that's normally thought of as being pixelated from that era, you play one of those games on a TV set, which is the way we all played them, you don't see pixels at all because TV sets are so blurry. And if I think back about playing like Legend of Zelda or something like that and thinking about the little sprites that were used for different objects, they really kind of took on this almost unidentifiable character where you couldn't really tell what something was. Like there was a little fairy or something in Legend of Zelda. And looking at it on a blurry TV set, you couldn't tell which part was her head and which part was her arm. And so you just really kind of had to imagine what she actually looked like. When we think about pixel art and think about, retro pixel art, that's because we're going back and we're playing these old games on emulators, on computers that have high resolution monitors that are not blurry. And, when a computer goes to blow up a Nintendo screen, which I think is like 320 by 240 or something like that, and it goes to blow it up onto your monitor, it makes all the pixels into boxes with perfect sharp corners. So then when we play Mario or try to grab a screenshot of Mario or something like that from one of these emulators, then we see all these sharp blocky pixels, and that kind of, similar to the way when a friend ages over time, your memories of them as a younger person are sort of replaced by how they look now.
I found this quite startling, that in our search for recreating nostalgia, we have created a warped, crisp digital version. There are some artists who present their work on the original hardware to avoid this, such as Ian Bogost's recent Atari interactive art game, A Slow Year, being presented on an original system and game cartridge. I can't help but feel that much of this content is a hard response to the crisp digital 3D graphics of modern games. Again, Jason Rohrer on the subject.
State it the way I've stated it in terms of like calling 3D just a fad and saying, 3D limits game design and all these other things that I've observed and come to realize. I don't really think there's consensus on that point. Those people are still are looking sort of from the outside at video games generally, and they'll see screenshots from Assassin's Creed or whatever with all the Renaissance era architecture or whatever it is, and they'll be sort of blown away by that still screenshot and say, wow, look at those beautiful graphics. That's where video games are going, and that's like That's sort of the pinnacle, the state of the art. I guess they just don't really have literacy in pixel art kind of stuff.
Does the pixel art style only entice nostalgic past gamers, and does it have any real value to the greater public? Another facet of this 8-bit movement is the rise of the chiptune scene. Musicians creating electronic music using the hardware of old game consoles, most popularly the original Game Boy. Another nostalgic and raw movement which has made its way somewhat into the mainstream music industry. I talked to Alex Yabsley, stage name dot.ay, a Brisbane chiptune artist, on the subject.
There was a Wired front page of their website recently where they had a video game imagery invades music videos or something. There's like, I think 12 different music videos that all use pixel art. And someone posted on a chip music forum about it, just saying, oh look, this thing's on Wired. And there is always the kind of comeback of, oh, it's going mainstream, quick, let's bail and keep it underground. There's definitely a specific musical sound to video game music. I always like to look at it, video game music is always made to accompany something, whereas the stuff that chip musicians do is really bringing the music to the forefront. I mean, there's always a backlash to, I guess, chip can be seen as one, but electronic music was getting more and more shiny and glossy, especially in the pop music world even more. It just kind of has that perfected digital sheen that everything kind of has its little place and sounds nice and neat. Chip's kind of definitely the most obvious, and in the fact that it is essentially going back 20 years in sound quality.
Nostalgia seems to be the initial driving force for many of these artists, the same way that childhood experience plays a large part in any traditional artist's work, but there seems to be something more to the pixel, an alluring rawness and freedom in its simplicity. My final interview is with Joe Brumm, an animator who has traditionally worked with cutout-style animation, most recently on Charlie and Lola. Joe made a pixel-style animation called Dan the Man, which has recently exploded online with close to 3.5 million YouTube views. Set within a video game world, the player character discovers there's life after rescuing the princess.
The iconic sort of look of it, I think, makes it so universal. Like a character just can take on, the audience, I think, assigns so much more to it. Leaving a lot of information out, it definitely does leave the audience a lot freer to assign different things to it. A lot of those games in your head, you think, yeah, that was so good, and then you get one of these emulators and you play them, and often they don't match up to your memories. But animation-wise, it was ideal because it was suddenly a break from having to do really smooth animation, and you could take pixel art into smooth realms, but down at 40 by 40 pixels, limited animation really comes into its own. There is something I really like about the kind of simplicity of pixel art. It's very bold colours, it's strong outlines, and part of me feels like it's a bit of a cheat as well, if you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a particularly good fine artist, so there's something nice about distilling it down to pretty much, I suppose, its most basic level of information, but still retaining a character. How different is it to pointillism, or, I suppose even Seurat was kind of, he got down onto that dot to dot level, didn't he?
Joe makes a great point. How different is pixel art from some of the previous abstract art movements? Pointillism, mosaic, and Roman tile work, geometric abstraction, tapestry, and many of the modernist geometric styles. It's very easy to make the connections. The argument might be about the process rather than the result. Pixel art is created digitally, while traditional art by hand. The pixel movement's strength lies in its abstract simplicity. Jason, Alex, and Joe all agree. It may be pulling on our nostalgic strings of a perceived romantic childhood of arcade cabinets and controllers, but similar things could be said about the arts and crafts movement, vintage fashion, and black and white film. So, does the pixel style have a greater value to people outside the world of games and computer tech? As we progress further and further into the digital age, whether at art, entertainment, or communication, the pixel is still our iconic starting point. It's our digital paint and easel, chisel and stone, bricks and mortar, paper and pen. We can connect with its simplicity and find deeper meaning in its abstraction. It has its own visual language, imagery, movement, interaction, and audio. So yes, I believe it does.
I don't know what the standard definition of an antique is, but some people say it's 25 years. Because after that amount of time, pretty much any object becomes interesting in its own right, even if it was, totally trivial and totally discardable when it was created.
When we look down real close and see our little cave paintings, our antique pixels, we can nostalgically remember our digital heritage and see that they are quite literally part of a much bigger picture.